I'm Mabel Barrington. I'm a refugee from the cities and also professor of sociology here at Cornell. And I am completely delighted to welcome Jeffrey Gettleman here to return his alma mater to talk to you about the things he's been doing in the last, now let's see, it has to be 2019, we're in, all right, 31 years since you left Cornell.
Yeah.
Because I actually, this is the second time I'm on a sort of platform with Jeffrey. In 2019, we were on an alumni panel and it was his 25th anniversary celebration. So I'm just adding 6 years. Anyway, and the reason I came back to do this is because it was so fun. He had so many exciting things to say. I love to listen to him. And I'm sure if you know anything to him, I will not say very much because I know he's been sort of starting in many ways. But at any rate, he did graduate Cornell in 1993. He reminded me that he majored in philosophy. He has had an extraordinary journalistic career since then. Started with the awards in 2012. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his international reporting. He's been a reporter at the New York Times. He's written for the New York Review of Books, Quarterly. He's won all sorts of other prizes besides the Pulitzer. And he's been in many ways all over the world. He's been in Africa, he's been in Ukraine. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. India.
Yes.
India, literally all over the world. And I think he grew up in Evanston, Illinois, which is right in the center of the country. And I always think that there's a certain Midwestern something for people growing up. That's my time at the University of Chicago. I decided, at any rate, that I would like him to speak for himself. So, Jeffrey Gettleman, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, guys. It's really nice to be back. And I wanted to give a talk about how I used my experience here, which in a way was all over the place and unfocused, to build a career that has given me a lot of meaning, a lot of adventure, and something that I'm proud of. So I want to start in Ukraine, where I've been working. And I'd like you guys to look at this picture. And let's get a little audience participation here. Will somebody share with me something you see in this picture or what you think this is a picture of? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can kind of see like off in the distance what seems like an explosion or like some kind of fire and smoke going.
Nice, nice, yeah.
You can see people trying to flee from the explosion.
Yes, yep. You see this, there's this person sort of crouched against a wall. Now, you guys look at the rear view mirror closely. And what do you see?
It's a strange angle.
Now look hard.
Shattered?
The window is broken, and this is in the air. So I was sitting in this car, and a Russian missile came into this town in Ukraine, and it exploded so close to where I was inside the car with the doors closed. It cracked the windshield, and it blew the mirror off. And there was so much noise and confusion that we didn't even realize this until we sent a video, because my photographer colleague had a body cam, and it recorded everything. And it was only when we freeze the imagery we saw this mirror was flying off. That's how close we were. It's this concussion sound that like boxes your ears. It's very disorienting, and we were inside the car. So that right arrow was my hotel room about a week before this hotel got bombed. And the one to the left is where my translator was sleeping. So if I had stayed there a week later, you guys would be doing something else at this moment. This is how we cover the front lines. We squeeze into a little car. We have our body armor on. The only way to get out to the front in Ukraine was using these camouflage civilian vehicles. The Ukrainian army doesn't have a lot of resources, so they're using their own private cars to drive to the front. They basically commute to the front. And this was a picture we shot right before we went in. Now, I'm starting here because I never expected I would be a war correspondent. I had lots of different interests at Cornell and a really good look. This is a fraternity Christmas formal, me and my date, a buddy of mine and his date. And I needed a style consultant back then, I think. I mean, it's like my bow tie is droopy. I'm the only one not smiling. And I came here in 1989, and I was all across the map as a student. I studied many different things. I studied Swahili, Indonesian, economics, biology, sculpture, creative writing. I just like went for it. I chose to be a philosophy major because that was the easiest major to satisfy. 8 classes, no prerequisites, boom, you're out. But it allowed me to take like full advantage of the experience of being here. And that's one of my messages to you guys, is that there's so much here, there's so much depth, there's so much breadth, there's so many different microcosms at Cornell. You're at a very big elite school with lots of different scenes and opportunities. I started out, I walked on the lacrosse team. I joined a fraternity that was full of lacrosse players. I kind of grew out of that a little bit. And by the time I left Cornell, I was really into photography. I worked for the Daily Sun. I was the editor of a small legal publication. I was the president of the Cornell Civil Liberties Union because nobody else wanted to do it. I went to a meeting. They're like, hey, why don't you be president? And so there's opportunities here that I really would I can't emphasize it enough. You guys are sitting right now in a place with so many different pathways. And one of my messages to you is don't define yourself too early, because you may not know what you want to do. I really didn't, but that was like a strength. When it came to senior year, I had to decide, okay, get a job, apply for a fellowship, graduate school, all the things. What am I looking at here? You guys seniors? We got a few seniors. Freshmen, any? Okay, sophomores, so it's a good mix, okay. So when you hit senior year is like the reality check, right? You have to sort of begin to really define yourself. And I was unfocused. I wanted to apply for a scholarship, and I applied for a Rhodes Scholarship. And then I was also thinking of applying for a Marshall Scholarship, which is similar to a Rhodes. The school told me, don't bother applying for a Marshall because I wasn't academic enough. I had a 3.8 GPA, and I was like, isn't that academic enough? But they're like, no, they're looking for a different type of person. And I ended up applying for a Marshall and a Rhodes, and I won the Marshall, which is another example. Don't let anybody talk you out of applying for something or going for something if you really believe in it, because they don't know your full story. They don't know how you're going to do in the interview. They don't know your full background, what you're passionate about. And I think that's like really important for young people, is don't discourage you guys from aiming high. And that's what the school was trying to do. They're like, oh, don't bother applying. And I ended up winning it. There was 2 kids in our whole school that won it that year. So I then went to Oxford. I studied anthropology, sort of continuing my liberal arts focus or lack of focus. I was good at writing. I like to read. I like to travel. I like to interact with people, put myself in new situations. And so at the end of Oxford, I decided to be a journalist. And one of my dreams was to work in East Africa. I'd studied Swahili here. I really cared about East Africa, but I didn't, you're looking at me now as somebody who's had this career in journalism. At the time, I really didn't, even at the end of graduate school, know that that was the right thing. I applied for some jobs on Wall Street. I thought about joining the State Department. I was just trying different things. And I ended up getting a job at a small paper in Florida, and that led to the Los Angeles Times, and then the Iraq War broke out. And I was an embedded journalist at the beginning of the Iraq War. Now, Iraq was a mess. It was an optional war that should have never been waged. Hundreds of thousands of people died. The Middle East then spawned ISIS, the Arab Spring, lots of chaos in lots of different countries. And it was all based on a lie that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. It didn't. As a journalist going in there, it's not my job to kind of write about the big picture. I had a very specific role. It was to be a combat reporter with a specific unit going into Iraq. And that's how I entered war correspondence. I'd never done anything like that before. This is just to make sure everybody's awake. So this is actually a self-inflicted wound during a Shia Muslim holiday where people bang their heads really hard and cut open their scalp. And I was in this massive crowd and met this guy who had just done that. We were also in a lot of situations that were very dangerous. In Iraq, there was this amazing access to see horrible things. A suicide bomb would go off. We'd rush to go cover it. There'd be people on the ground, wounded or dead. The Iraqi police would just kind of wave us through. No yellow police tape, no restrictions, just a free-for-all. And when you're covering a conflict like this, it's difficult to zero in because there's so much action. There's stories happening on the battlefield with the economy, with politics. And part of our job, and an important skill for any field, is trying to put your finger on something different, something meaningful, and tell a specific story that represents the bigger picture. We do that all the time. I like to tell stories that affect people at a very kind of grassroots level, not about the presidents or the prime ministers or even necessarily the military, but about the civilians that are caught up in conflicts. I've been doing that throughout my career. And even in a place like Iraq or Congo or Somalia or Afghanistan or Ukraine where I've been working, there's always people who get stuck in these conflict zones. They don't want to leave because they're attached to their house or they have family or they're disabled. There's always civilians in the middle of these situations. Look closely at this kid's face. So I went to a place in Iraq, in Baghdad, where the US was giving money to families of people they had killed. And there literally was a captain sitting at a desk with a stack of $100 bills saying, "I'm sorry," and counting out $5,000. And one thing you learn when you go overseas, if this hasn't occurred to you already, but I was like very patriotic for a lot of my life, and I still am in a deep way, but you learn that the US is not always the good guy. We're not always the good guy. And in this case, the American military was dropping cluster bombs all across Iraq. Cluster bomb is a gigantic steel bomb that as it's falling through the air bursts open into these little, they call them bomblets, that are the size of like a Coke can. They spread out over a really wide area and they're supposed to blow up. A lot of them don't blow up and they're hazards for years to come. This kid was out in his pasture and his cow kicked a cluster bomb. It blew up in his, it killed the cow and the shrapnel sprayed in his face. And he was coming for help because he was blind in one eye and had all these scars from the dirt that was blown into his face from the explosion. So I did a big front page story on him. And one thing I like to do, and it's part of my pitch for journalism, is we're a bridge. We're a bridge. I'm a bridge between this kid in Iraq and people sitting in Ithaca, New York, or suburban Chicago, or California, or around the world. You're not going to go to Iraq and meet this kid, but you might be interested in his story. You might care. And I see my job is to kind of connect the experience that he's having with your life and kind of grab you by the shoulders and say, hey, listen, this is what's happening right now. So we did this big front page story. I spent time with his family while I was writing it, and this was great. I mean, another really nice thing about journalism is you get this excuse to just hang out with people, see another walk of life, experience a whole nother world. And so I was in his village in Hilla, Iraq, doing that. And after our story ran, all these people wrote into me and they said, we want to help. And somebody raised money to bring him to the US to get plastic surgery. And this is him arriving in New York City. Totally ecstatic. Stranger who's just reading the New York Times wanted to change this kid's life. Very gratifying for me. This was, in a way, it's like a similar story. This was a US soldier, 21 years old, at the beginning of the Iraq War, really motivated guy, was like an all-state wrestler in high school, smart kid, went to college, enlisted, which is unusual because if you have a college education, you can become an officer. He wanted to enlist. Goes to Iraq. A month or two later, explosion happens near him, kind of like the one that I showed you in Ukraine. And a piece of shrapnel, just a little piece, goes through his head and severs the optic nerve in one eye and kind of comes out the other eye. Leaves him totally blind. And he comes back to this little town in Pennsylvania, this like big, strapping, like 6'3", like athletic guy, totally blind and bitter. And somehow I found, it's interesting like how people will talk to journalists and share their story. But I found where he lived. We talked to him before we came and we said, hey, we want to write about the wounded of this conflict. Will you talk to us? And I spent 2 weeks with his family, just kind of watching him, talking to him, trying to understand him. And he was a representation of this whole new generation of wounded soldiers. They have all this body armor, and it's these facial and head injuries that are what's getting people now. Because that's like the one part of your body that's not protected, your face. They haven't figured out anything yet to like totally encapsulate a body and protection. So then in 2006, when I was 34 years old, my dreams kind of lined up. I'd always wanted to work in Africa. I studied Swahili, and I wanted to be a journalist in Africa. And I finally got that job. It took way longer than I expected, but in a way that was good because I had more maturity, more judgment when I arrived. And I covered a lot of conflict. That's what we do as journalists. We cover these dramatic events. And sometimes people say to me, you guys are always writing about bad news. Why don't you write something good? We hear that criticism a lot. And I have a few ways to respond to it. One is, would you guys rather read about 1,000 planes taking off and landing safely, or the one that crashes? What's more interesting? What's more important to know about? Could we learn from the one that crashed? That's our responsibility, to look at these problems. And so we focus a lot on problems, on big dramatic events. I covered Ebola, and I did a story about this little girl. She was an orphan. Both of her parents died. Nobody knew her name. And they nicknamed her Sweetie Sweetie. And she was living in an Ebola clinic with her mom as her mom was dying. And everybody thought she was bad luck because her parents had Ebola and nobody wanted to touch her. And we did a big piece in the New York Times. And again, I was flooded with emails and requests to help. And it's not my role to be a fundraiser. It's not my role to give out aid. Sometimes that's very hard. I'm in a place where people are hurt or sick and they need help. And I've been in situations where I've given people money, I've given people rides, I've tried to get help for them. But our role is to tell these stories and to show the world what's happening. And sometimes that's hard. But the best case when it really works out is when we can write about something and good things happen. And in this case, after we published the story, somebody adopted her, they sent her to school. It was like her life was changed because we chose to write about her. Oops. This is a video that has sound. There it is. So I do a lot of work in different mediums. This was a video I do for the New York Times. I do audio. I've been on the Daily. We do other podcasts. We do short stuff, and that's what I value about being a good journalist. You want to be able to communicate across. You just want to be a good communicator. You want to be a good writer. You want to be a good speaker, and you also want to be a good listener. Like listening is super important. Just to like look at somebody and listen to them. You guys are doing an excellent job. But really, it's like when you're in a conversation, how do you keep the conversation going? How do you really absorb information? You got to be present. If you're thinking about a million other things or checking your phone or whatever, and we all do it, you're not gonna absorb that information. And that's a very important skill. You guys are gonna be tested on it. You're gonna be in an interview, you're gonna be in a situation, somebody's gonna ask you something, and they're gonna be checking if you're listening. And somehow you have to quiet yourself down and just kind of focus and interact. Listen, be interested in what they're saying. Try to get interested, try to be curious. That'll help. If you're just faking it, it's gonna go in one ear and out the other. But if you're actually like, hey, I wanna hear your story, where are you from, tell me more, you'll absorb it. Sometimes, I mean, I could show you guys 500 slides of all these different adventures, but I like this picture because it was my bright idea to do a story in Somalia, and that's a video producer I was with, and we got stuck in the middle of nowhere and had to spend 2 days sleeping basically on the dirt, waiting for a plane to take us to the next place. And the video producer was not happy about that. And I, as the correspondent, I'm kind of the leader of this little team. I'm making a lot of the decisions. And so then I, have to deal with bad decisions that I've made. One of the bigger stories I did in East Africa was about the Ogaden Desert. Does anybody in this room know anything about the Ogaden Desert? Okay, what little do you know?
I only really know about it in a historical context. So I know that it was an area that was kind of in contention in the 1940s is basically it. So nothing relevant to the modern day. But I know it was important then for, I think it was resource reasons. I don't remember the specifics, sorry.
Okay, no, that's great. I appreciate that. The Ogaden Desert did have oil, and there was some exploration that led to different sides wanting to sort of take it over. That's true. It's also ethnically different than the rest of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that was never a colony. There's just one on the entire continent, never colonized. Liberia is sometimes thrown in that mix, but that was a creation of the American government in the 1900s for freed slaves. But it was connected to the US. Ethiopia is this ancient state that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They have their own, have you guys ever seen Amharic? They have their own alphabet. It's a very interesting place, their own cuisine, their own culture, but it's a tough place. It's used to keeping that space together by force. And that Ogaden area is a Somali-speaking Muslim population. They are Somalis. They are different from the highland Ethiopians that control the country. Ethiopia recently has had a lot of problems with different groups trying to break off. This was one of the first. And I wanted to do a story about a rebel group that was operating in the Ogaden. And I was very nervous about going in. I didn't know much about them. I had a few contacts. And I thought these guys might kidnap me. They might, they could be extremists that are sort of luring me in. I had some decent contacts that made the introductions, and I went for it. All the guys with guns in this picture are no longer with us. There were young guys, your age or younger, fighting for this cause. And while we were out there, we even had a sense that this was like a very futile battle. I went out and spent a couple weeks with them, and I was struck by their vulnerability. What I thought was going to be threatening and menacing, they were actually, very thin. They didn't have a lot of food. Their uniforms were in bad shape. Their guns were old and rusty. And I spent 2 weeks tramping through the desert with very little water, very little food. We were literally drinking from mud puddles in the desert. That was all there was to drink. And once I had a plastic bottle, I scooped it up. It was literally like orange. Scooped it up, I'm drinking, and then I look in the bottle, and I see something swimming at the bottom of the bottle, like a tadpole, and I'd already drank half the water. This is just a little video clip from that experience. He's basically telling us what we should do if we get attacked. At the end of the trip, I was exhausted, kind of almost dizzy with hunger. I'm saying goodbye to the rebel group. I'm taking my last notes the old-fashioned way, pen and paper. It wasn't even meant to be funny. That's how we did it. And I felt pretty good about this group. And they were warning me. They said, be really careful when you leave us because the government may try to kill you. And I'm like, come on, guys. They may try to kill you. They're not going to kill me. I'm working for the New York Times. I'm known quantity. Like, why would they like, how, that would be a big deal. So as soon as we left these guys, I was with a video producer and a photographer. We checked into a little hotel. 10-minute, not even a hotel, that gives you the wrong impression. Little guest house on the side of the road with like a wooden fence and a bare room and a bed with like metal springs. We check in, drop our bags, pickup truck zooms in, Army pickup truck. 5 guys jump out, take their AK-47s, take off the safety, chamber a bullet, and say, you're coming with us. And I'm like, no, I'm not coming with you. Who are you? And they grab me and throw me in this truck. And then they took us off to prison. And I was in an Ethiopian prison, a series of them, for a week. Now, it doesn't sound that bad. Now you see me, right? It's like, fine, right? He survived. But at the time, you don't know that. Every day I thought, I might never get out of here. These guys might kill me. Just the audacity to arrest us for no cause. And we found ourselves in the middle of this conflict where they were upset that we had gotten the rebel side of the story. The rebels were representing this oppressed group of people that had been brutalized by the Ethiopian government. No journalists had entered this area, and we had this story. They took our notes, they took our phones, they took our computers, they took everything. But the video producer was smart, and when we got sent to prison, she put these tapes, just a couple, in dirty socks in this smelly bag of clothes And when they literally booked us in prison. They took all of our stuff. They took my belt. They took my shoelaces. They locked me in a little room, the steel door, and shoving food once a day that was covered in maggots for me to eat. But the video producer was sharp and hid these 2 tapes in her socks in this dirty lawn in like the middle of like a squishy, big, yucky bag, and they didn't find them. And so when we got released, they gave us our clothes, not our computers, not our phones, not our notebooks, nothing. But they gave back the clothes, and we had some tapes. And from that, we put together this big front page story that put this conflict on the map. Nobody had like heard about this. Very few, very few. I mean, there was some history, but very, very little. So now I'm in a new part of the world. Guys, where do you think this is from?
Somewhere in Eastern Europe.
Yes? Yeah. Good guess, man. So excellent. Thank you. So the Ukrainian flag, yellow on the bottom, blue on top, is a symbol of these yellow fields in the blue sky. It's just 2 bars. That's where they get it from. And it's beautiful. But it's also utterly destroyed. This is like one of countless towns I was in that looked like this. Every house blown apart. There's miles and miles of this. And again, we're looking for stories. I've written military stories. I've written stories about Zelensky. I've written dozens, scores of stories about Ukraine. I was there from the beginning of the war until recently. But again, I'm looking for something distinctive, something that really like interests you. You're bombarded by a ton of stories and information and websites, and we all are. This is in a trench. This is how they fight the war. They shoot those mortars or artillery from 5, 10, 20 miles away, and they're guided by a group of people with drones and some technology trying to figure out where the Russians are. The Russians are doing the same thing, and these things explode and tear into people, and then we would go to the hospitals and see some of the guys who are wounded. And here, this little device they're using is a tiny metal detector to find pieces of shrapnel in the soldier's body. I'm just standing there. Nobody cares. So like we ask permission. We say, hey, is it okay for us to film and report? They say, yeah. There's just, thousands of guys getting blown apart on both sides by this war. But I found a really interesting story when I was there about an American who was a great representation, in a way, of a lot of things that I've covered and the whole story of the US military. This guy, Andy Milburn, had been in Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, a Marine colonel who had been part and in a way an agent of American military failure. All those, Iraq, you can maybe make an argument that it wasn't a total loss, but that's hard because it was all based on a lie and a lot of people died. But Afghanistan was a total loss. Somalia was basically a total loss. And this guy was filled with this guilt and restlessness that he should get involved in Ukraine. This was a morally just war. This was the right war to fight in. And he was very open. And part of my work is to try to get somebody to really open up and share. He had written a book. He talked about how when he was in Iraq, he's a colonel, an officer. He was in charge of a checkpoint. They were letting buses go through this checkpoint. There was miscommunication. Somebody opened fire on a bus. A little girl gets shot in the stomach. He's screaming at his soldiers, why'd you shoot? And he goes and tries to give first aid to this girl, and she's got a hole in her stomach the size of a softball and dies like in his hands. The guy is haunted. And so he goes to Ukraine to try to start a small organization to help the Ukrainians. We went with him to frontline towns that were very dangerous. Rockets, I mean, this doesn't even capture it, but this is a town that, Soledar, that's now Russian occupied. Rockets are coming in, they're slamming like all around us, really loud, like a metallic sound that just shakes the whole earth and your head. And we're just trying to not get killed. He's trying to convince people to leave. These civilians, like I was saying, don't want to leave. They're stubborn. And he's like, hey, you're going to get killed if you stay. And we're watching him negotiate with them. While we were doing this, we got a flat tire. If you look back at this picture, it's hard to see it, but you can see like, these are like pieces of metal. And we were driving around these streets and we got a flat tire in this combat zone. And while we're fixing the tire, a fighter jet swoops over us and starts dropping bombs around us while we're like all trying to fix this tire. We duck for cover. If you guys can recognize somebody here. Photographer took like this picture at the moment. We're all jumping on the ground. And we ended up doing a big piece on him as again, not just about him, but him as a symbol of what a lot of people felt about Ukraine. That this was a just war. We fought a lot of bullshit wars. There's been a lot of suffering for the wrong reasons. And here was an underdog that was invaded. And a lot of people felt we have a moral obligation to fight for them and help them. And I'll just read you the beginning of how I started the story. Please, come with me. He was begging. He didn't have much time. The Russians were blasting this town in eastern Ukraine with rockets, airstrikes, and thundering artillery. The ground shook. Andrew Milburn, a retired Marine colonel, could have been hanging out at home 6,000 miles away in the Florida suburbs, enjoying retirement. Instead, he was standing in Soledar, a town under fierce assault, black smoke filling his nostrils, staring at a Ukrainian woman he had never met, pleading with her to evacuate. Please, he tried again, you will die here. That's how I like to write. It's direct, strong verbs. You know, a lot of people say never start a story with a quote. You know, you got to break the rules sometimes. And that was a moment of high drama. And that gets you interested. You're like, what's going on? That's like something's at stake. This is from the first picture I showed you guys. So lately, guys, I've had a quieter job. This I shot on a recent trip. Anybody guess where this is? Excellent guess, thank you. So I've been covering Greenland, and Greenland is, I knew nothing about Greenland. I've spent a lot of my career in Africa. I was in South Asia, been in the Middle East. I knew nothing about Greenland. I came back from a vacation. This news broke about Trump making these threats saying he was going to take over Greenland. And my editors are like, you got to get on a plane and go to Greenland, which is part of the fun of what I do. And it's, again, it's all consistent with what I've been trying to tell you. It's like, keep an open mind. Just don't rule anything out. Because you're going to have a lot of opportunities to do things and push yourself and experience things that you didn't even know or think about. One really interesting thing about Greenland, there's a lot, but it's a very harsh place. It's 80% ice. It's covered in Greenland, 80% of Greenland is covered by this gigantic ice cap. It's enormous. It's 1,500 miles long and 600 miles wide. It's the biggest island in the world. And people have lived there for thousands of years, hunting and fishing to survive. And they're very proud of that. And that's what Trump is now dealing with. He's dealing with these people who don't want to be American. They find that really disrespectful. They're like, we're tough, we've survived, we are connected to this Inuit community that has lasted here forever. So I went ice fishing. That's a halibut, if you guys didn't know. I should have asked who knew what fish that was. I sure didn't. And I'm holding it out to make it look bigger. It wasn't that big, but the camera, the person who's taking the picture, if you hold out the fish, it looks bigger. And this guy is just, it was 30 degrees below zero. I grew up in Chicago. I went to school here. I have never been that cold. I literally took off my gloves to take a video with my phone, and 30 seconds of just exposure, and I couldn't feel my hand for 2 hours. But Greenland is popular. And I did lots of interviews because all of a sudden everybody's interested in Greenland. And this is the interview, just a little clip, I'll play it. But what I like is I'm usually the one asking the questions. But it's fun to be in the hot seat. I kind of like it. Because when you're doing an interview, what you say sticks. You can't edit it. Like, I obsess about my writing. I write something, I change some words, I try different things, I cut and paste. Like, we all do that. You're doing a live interview, live TV interview, there's no cutting and pasting. What comes out of your mouth is all you got. It sticks. But I like that challenge. I like that focus. And so I would just, as a suggestion to you guys, look for opportunities where you can get practice doing that. You know, there's all these struggles with AI use and how much you sort of rely on that. You're in the middle of an interview and you can't be like, hey, let me ask ChatGPT what the right answer is. Somebody's gonna be looking at you and be like, hey, tell me about yourself, or why is this the way to solve a problem? And they're gonna be judging you on how you react. And that's just a good thing to remember, is be ready for that. Be looking forward. I like, when I do interviews, I'm looking at the interviewer thinking, give me your hardest question, because I'll give you the best answer. If it's a really dumb question, like if you do a job interview and somebody says, hey, tell me about yourself, that's a hard question to give a good answer to. It is, because it's just such a sort of cliche, broad, vague question. It's when you get something hard and direct about the work or something specific you've done. Why did you study this? Or why did you spend your time doing that? Better. So here, you'll see me deal with this guy. I'm now the Greenland expert, so I could talk all day about Greenland. But the point I was making was, and it's interesting, the US has been talking about Greenland since 1867. After the Alaska Purchase that expanded the United States, the Secretary of State at the time said, let's also get Greenland. And then in 1910, there was an effort to take Greenland over from Denmark. Greenland has been part of Denmark for 300 years. The Danes colonized it. It's very far away from Denmark. It's actually closer to the United States. It's up in the middle of nowhere, closer to Canada. And then after World War II, there was an effort too to try to take over Greenland. So that's what's interesting. A lot of people sort of dismissed Trump for being like out of left field, but it really was a pretty established idea. This story, if anybody's checking the website of the New York Times, was just published. I'm now covering a Santa Claus crisis. I went to a little town in Finland where they've promoted themselves as the real hometown of Santa Claus. And now there's so many tourists, there's like a revolt in town because it's all the same issues that are happening in Europe and Barcelona and Rome, where people are just sick of all these tourists coming. They drive up the prices of rentals. They stomp all over the streets. It just makes life difficult for the locals. So be mindful, you're in Ithaca. There's the town, the gown, the townies, the Cornell community. It's the same thing. Who really belongs? So that's what I've been doing lately. And just to finish up, how do I see journalism? I see it as exploring the world and adventure, meeting all types of people, listening, connecting. That's a very important part of my experience, is connecting with people. Having the opportunity to sit and meet a stranger and really understand a little bit of how they look at the world, and communicating in writing, communicating in interviews and speaking, in videos and podcasts. I wrote a book a few years ago about my experiences as a journalist. I said a lot of it in Africa. It's a memoir. It's all true. And there's a juicy Cornell chapter. So if anybody, not that you guys have tons of time to read, but keep it in mind if you're looking for just an escape about what it's like to kind of grow up in a suburb of the US, have a very conventional upbringing, come to school here, and then branch out into the world. That's what I wrote about. Now, the best part of my whole story is that video producer who was upset at me is actually my wife. And it all started right here. So that's the end of my story for now. You guys have been a great audience, and thank you for listening.